Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Converge and BSides for organizing everything, allowing me to present, putting all of the activities together. It is a change in schedule, so as you see, we're going to talk about BurpSuite. I mentioned earlier it's not a 101 BurpSuite talk kind of thing. We'll talk about extensions, how to actually begin building your own extension. Lots of examples, lots of resources. And also some automation features that are built in BurpSuite. They can use to make your security testing more automated, more easy. So the rationale behind this presentation stems kind of from the same train of thought that you heard from Mark earlier in his keynote about having 101 kind of presentations and conferences, except I'm coming at it from a different perspective. It's great that we have to teach up-and-coming InfoSec professionals about the basics of things, but I think they should also have that sense of curiosity and self-learning drive to go out and learn about BurpSuite, for example. At least pick up the basics. There are tons of resources out there, tons of ways for them to learn about HTTP, how to use it, what a proxy is. So what I do want to share, and I've started recently doing this, and so far it's working out, are my own projects and the things that I have learned, and where did I get caught? Where did I have to do extra research? What kinds of things that I had to look up? And you know, caveats, tips and tricks, so that I can share with everybody else, so you don't have to spend the same amount of time looking these things up, doing this research. You can just grab what I have and take it and start from there. It won't be a lot of super technically involved stuff, just lots of good tips, lots of good resources. Quick note, the orange, totally coincidental, but I love it. So let's get started. My name is Marius Nepomuceno. I am from Brazil. My long name is one of the reasons I go by Marius. Some of the stuff I've done, I've co-founded CleveSec. It's an organization for InfoSec professionals in Cleveland to come together. We have presentations every month. We have things like pub nights or other community nights every month as well to try to get the community together. We have tons of InfoSec organizations that don't talk to each other, so we're trying to get them all to talk and share and all of that good stuff. mznlab.net is where I publish all of my projects. This project is published there. You won't have to take pictures of the slides or anything. I'll give you a link. Just go there. Everything is there. Slides, extra resources, guides, screenshots. And I encourage you to do the same. If you're working on projects, as small as they are, someone else might be working on the same thing. They can either contribute to give you some guidance, or you can have some guidance that you can give to them. I don't even market this. I just I'm marketing it now, I guess, by talking about it. But just by sharing these things, you know, someone else is going to be like, oh, that guy had a blog post or whatever on BurpSuite. Here's the link. And then that guy's link has references to other links. And so you start building your network that way. Some stuff about which I'll talk all day, not using final prepositions and other language topics. I love languages. I actually took a bunch of college courses in literature and all kinds of awesome stuff. Brazil, because I am from Brazil, and how it's spelled with a Z but sounds, or spelled with an S but sounds like a Z. So orthography and phonetics are amazing topics for me to talk about which to talk. InfoSec, Python, general hackery stuff. I am super curious, super willing to learn. Don't mind asking questions. Don't mind sounding stupid when I'm asking questions, because that's the only way to learn. If I don't ask anything, I can look it up online, sure, but you know, it doesn't always work out. @EliSpike is my Twitter handle. I don't tweet a lot myself. I try to retweet things that I really, really like, so I try to minimize the noise. But I'm always willing to talk in there. If you tweet at me, I'll certainly reply. So let me preface you with some things. What you need to know, some basic Python. You don't have to be Python guru or anything like that, because we will be using Jython, which is Python enabled with extra Java features as well, or Java enabling Python, however you want to look at it. Some Java UI, it's good to be familiar with some of the terms that I'll show, but you don't have to be. You just, all of the Java UI stuff that I used to build all the resources and all of the actual extensions that I use at work, I had to pick up myself by literally looking at the docs. And that little number you see is what I'm going to tell you now, points to the corresponding resource at that link. So that's the link you want for today. When you go there, you will see a list of things. The very first thing will be the slides. You don't have to copy or take pictures or anything. The slides will be right there, the first thing. And then there will be a list. And the very first item will be a link to the docs, the Java docs, so you can learn about Java UI stuff. The second item will be, as you'll see in a bit, something else. And in this presentation, you see a little number 2 at the top. Make sense? Any questions? All right. Also, because this is a lot of explaining and guiding, interrupt me at any time if you don't understand anything. I'll ask if anyone has questions plenty of times to make sure we're all moving together. I'm assuming you have BurpSuite Pro because I did when I built all of this stuff, and so I didn't make any distinctions between free and pro. That being said, the free version still has a lot of good stuff they can use. The latest free version actually allows you to use Extender, so you might have a few restrictions, not too many. You can certainly get started with the free version and learn how to build extensions and how to use the automation features. So all in all, this is aimed at BurpSuite users who haven't explored all of the depth in BurpSuite yet. So you know how to use it, you know that it's a proxy, you know intruder, scanner, and all that stuff. Now it's the time to take that extra step and really wield BurpSuite to its full potential. So what you learn, how to actually start writing your own extension, line by line even, at least to begin with, and then I have some extra resources at my website that you can use as a shell, for example, for your extensions and things like that. So again, we'll be using Python, so expect some code. It's not overly complex code. I will explain it. And then you'll learn what you can do with these extensions, what the BurpSuite API provides, how to use some of the built-in automated features, and also what you can do with them to ease your security testing. So let's start with the BurpSuite extension API. Any questions, by the way? I told you I'd ask if anyone had questions. I will, lots of times. So the BurpSuite extension API is truly, truly limitless. It has a bunch of stuff. So it's included in BurpSuite. All of the information you need, all of the classes that they expose are all within BurpSuite. Go to Extender tab, APIs, subtab, and you can see on the left over there, you can see all of the different classes. And on the right will be the actual class and the actual class methods and everything. You see here it says controller on the bottom left. That's a search box. You can search for terms in each of the class definitions to find out what you're looking at, find specific sections of that interface that you want to use, and so forth. The two buttons at the bottom there, Save Interface File and Save JavaDoc Files. Save Interface Files allows you to actually save the Java interface files themselves, so you can use something like an IDE when you're developing. And I have a guide for that, as you'll see. Save JavaDoc files will just give you an HTML website with all of the documentation behind BurpSuite. So it will literally extract it from BurpSuite here and put it in nice HTML docs and very pretty. So now we're going to start. This is literally how you start writing your extension. Import stuff. From burp, import iBurp extender. That will be your first line ever. All of the other interfaces then can be imported. They can, these interfaces that you will import here will be interfaces that your classes themselves will use. So the classes that you're writing in your extension will implement certain BurpSuite interfaces. Those are the ones you need to import. So examples. I have lots of examples here. iMessage Editor Tab Factory and iMessage Editor Tab create custom tabs in the BurpSuite UI, and you can do whatever you want with them. Intruder payload generation interfaces allow you to create custom intruder payloads, point exactly where in the HTTP message the payload should be replaced, and other things like that. Scanner insertion point interfaces allow you to customize the scanner to run additional scans or use special parameters, specific parameters for scanning. The context menu factory, this particular one allows you to modify BurpSuite's existing right-click menu to add items that you want to execute custom actions and things like that. The HTTP listener is a very special one. I like this one a lot. It actually allows you to modify a message before, without using the UI at all, before it ever leaves BurpSuite. And it's the last thing that will happen. So HTTP listener is the last thing that gets triggered. You can do whatever you want with the HTTP message at that point. It won't be replicated in the UI because it's past the UI at that point. It's about to leave BurpSuite. You can do whatever you want at that point. I used it for a pretty powerful purpose, which I'll share in a moment. So, going back a little bit, again, all of the interfaces that your actual classes will implement, only those need to be imported, because all of the other BurpSuite interfaces can be accessed through something called callbacks. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about callbacks in a bit as well. After you're done importing all of the BurpSuite interfaces, import everything else you need. Either from Python, so do your from OS import get current working directory, make directories, change directory path for directory operations. From system import exception info, that's good for debugging and outputting messages about your extension and whatever. From array import array, that's one of the ones that I had to use because BurpSuite is built in Java, so sometimes I need to use an actual Java array, and then I have to convert things from a Python list to a Python array, and then from a Python array to a Java array, but it works out. Since we're using Jython, you can also import things from Java directly. So you can go from java.swing, import JMenu. Now you can make a custom right-click menu in your extension, and so forth. Any questions? All right. Your first class, after you've imported everything that you want, you're going to write exactly that. Class burp extender, open parenthesis, iburp extender, close parenthesis. The ... over there is for all of those additional interfaces that you want to implement within this class, which you should have already imported. And we'll go into more detail about that as well. Second thing you're going to write, define a function called register extender callbacks. And that function takes self as well as a variable called callbacks. All of these names that you see, class, burp extender, define, register extender callbacks, these are, you have to have these names. You can't just give the burp extender class its own name because the API, the BurpSuite API, calls for that name. So don't stray from the nomenclature too much. Self.callbacks, just to declare a local copy of our variable, equals the callbacks that will be passed in. Self.helpers, I left out a dot. I'll have to fix that. Self.helpers, just to declare a local helpers variable, will be callbacks.getHelpers. And that method is documented in the API and everything. But I don't want to get ahead of myself. We will talk about callbacks and helpers in a bit. So like I said before, you can either stop at iburp extender when you are implementing interfaces into your class, or you can implement other BurpSuite interfaces right from that class. So if your class is going to contain custom tabs, you go ahead and say class BurpExtender, open parenthesis, iBurpExtender, comma, iMessageEditorTab factory. And now you can use that interface within this class. New classes outside of your BurpExtender class are needed if you're going to implement two of the same BurpSuite interface, or more, so more than one. So two, if your extension is going to have two custom tabs, you cannot simply implement iMessageEditorTab factory, for example, right in your BurpExtender class. You have to create a new class, and you can call it whatever you want at that point. And in that new class, implement iMessageEditorTab factory. I'll reiterate that with examples as well. So callbacks and helpers, finally. Any questions, by the way? Cool. Callbacks and helpers. Refer to the documentation for the full explanation of all of the things you can do with callbacks and helpers. But a quick overview. Callbacks provide tons of methods and functionality, things like adding, removing, registering, getting, and setting, and creating stuff. They're used to enable functionality that BurpSuite's interfaces already provide, and you just want to access them. And also communicate between these different interfaces, between these different BurpSuite elements, different tools and tabs and things like that. Helpers, on the other hand, are useful for manipulating HTTP messages themselves. So analyze it, decode it, encode it, build an HTTP message, convert it to something else. It's got some helping methods like convert it to different representations, again, encoding, decoding, things like that. So a lot of obtaining and manipulating actual HTTP data so that your extension can call upon it. Okay, building on. So everything that you cannot quite see is everything we've already done, because I want you to focus on the white. So after you've done your register extender callbacks and defined your callbacks and helpers variables, you go callbacks.setExtensionName, so you can give it a nice name, give it an awesome name, callbacks.register some interface. This is what the .register method, and each interface has its own register method, will declare to BurpSuite what your extension is going to be. So does this extension use scanner insertion points or intruder insertion points? Does this extension contain a custom tab? So BurpSuite can know what to activate, what to call on. So here's an example. I only require, in this example, one custom tab for my extension. That means that I can, right from my class BurpExtender, I can implement iMessageEditorTab factory right in there, within my parentheses. Since I am implementing iMessageEditorTab factory, I have to register it within my extension. So I do callbacks.register blah blah blah, and I just pass it self. By the way, there's how the tab. So there are two interfaces that you require for creating a custom tab. For example, one is the iMessageEditorTab factory. One is the iMessageEditorTab. That's just how the API does it. So you need a factory at the top level, and the factory actually creates the tab. You'll see how it works. And then still within our BurpExtender class, you go define, create new instance, pass it those three variables. That the signature for all of the functions, again, you can find them all in the documentation. That's how I know to pass itself, comma controller, comma editable. And all that is doing is just returning a tab class. And as you'll see shortly, that my tab class will be implementing the iMessageEditorTab. And that's it. Any questions? All right. Now, on the flip side, I need two custom tabs, which means I cannot just call iMessageEditorTab factory straight inside my burp extension class. I have to actually still register my extension as a custom tab extension, but now I am passing an actual factory class, which of course I will have to create myself. So my factory class is the one that implements iMessage Editor Tab Factory. This allows me to implement more than one tab. So if I wanted a second tab, I would have my factory class 2, and that class 2 implemented the tab factory as well, and I could create a new tab. Make sense? Notice how each signature has its own variables, just what the API calls for. Always look into the documentation to learn that stuff. And of course, just like we were creating a new instance of a tab previously within our burp extender class, now because we are putting it in its own factory class, we still need to create a new instance, but the function, the define create new instance, will be this time inside the factory class itself. And I'm just returning a new tab. So far, so good. And my tab class would look something like this. I have class, my tab class. That name, by the way, can be whatever you want. My tab class, doesn't matter. It does implement the iMessage Editor Tab interface, and then it can implement any of the other BurpSuite interfaces that you have imported. Aside from this, building your extender class and then your individual interface classes, you don't need much else to really write your BurpSuite extension. So just keep on building, declare any variables and functions that you want for your custom actions, your custom methods and things like that. Always check out the API for the built-in functions, things you can already use. You don't have to recreate functionality that the API already exposes. And notice that I have an extender variable that's trickling down. That extender variable that's trickling down is my top-level class, burp extender. And if you remember, that class had the self.helpers and self.callbacks that we declared. Those trickle down with the extender class as well. So you can use your callbacks and helpers all the way down into your individual specialized classes. So in this case, you do extender.callbacks or extender.helpers. So some examples of what you can do with extensions. Obviously, I've been talking about it this whole time. Custom tabs. Within those tabs, you can use Java elements to create tables. And you have nice rows and columns and resizing and all that jazz. You can have scroll panes. So if your table gets super long, you can actually scroll down to see the data. You can have a plain message editor. If you want your tab to show different information just like BurpSuite does it, but in a different format, just have a regular message editor for you there. You can use HTTP Listener for custom HTTP message manipulation. Again, it's the last thing to trigger right before the message leaves BurpSuite. And it allows you to do some funny things. Custom intruder and scanner payloads and actions. This is huge. If you want to, your web applications, there are all kinds and variety of them. So they will require specialized testing scenarios, right? That's why we do it. A machine can't just do that. But we can make our lives easier. Put intruder and scanner to work. Teach them how and where to find these parameters. What kinds of payloads to try in those parameters. That'll be a good day. You can do serialization and deserialization. This is awesome for custom serialization types and things like that. You can add menu entries on BurpSuite's own right-click menu, or you can create your own custom right-click menu that would work in your own extension with its own options, its own actions. So lots of Options, lots of flexibility. Here's one of the resources. This is resource number 2. So in the website, the link that I gave you, it'll be the second on the list after the presentation. I have a shell of a custom tab for you to see how it is, where to declare the functions and everything. Everything we've talked about so far will be in there. It's just a text file with Python code in there. The code won't execute or anything. That's just text. So the tab itself doesn't do anything special to the text. It's just a new tab for you to see where it pops up. And it does the same thing as BurpSuite's raw HTTP message tab. It's just a clone, but at least you can see how it works. You can have a shell of your first extension from where you can start building your own functionality. So in this case, okay, I lied a little bit. It's not the same as the raw BurpSuite tab, because in the raw tab, if you modify anything in there, that'll actually be what gets sent over the wire. In this case, because I wanted to make a point, modifying the text, never mind, I was right the first time. Modifying the text does mean so it is the same as the raw, but it doesn't have to be the case. That was my point. It doesn't have to be the case. You can actually create a tab where you can modify all you want, and when you forward that message, if it was intercepted, it will still remember the original message before any modifications. So this allows for some interesting usages as well. Just keep that in mind. It does have a custom menu, so when you see the custom tab in there and it has an HTTP message, you can actually select a piece of text with just dragging your mouse. Right-click, and there will be an option for you to mark the text selection as an intruder payload, and then send it to intruder. When you send it to intruder already knows, because the extension tells it where your selection was, automatically marks it as an attack position, and then you can proceed to do your own payloads from there. So use it as a reference or a shell for your own thing. See how it works, build it from there. Here's a more involved example. At work, I actually developed a BurpSuite extension for our own custom serialization thing internally to test it. So obviously I had to clean it up, but a lot of the stuff that just has to do with message manipulation and things like that, I was able to retain. So here's some features. It's got some a custom tab with an embedded scrolling table. So it's a Java table, and if the rows exceed the size of the window, it'll pop up a scrolling pane. It's only enabled when it actually detects a request that has that kind of serialization. So I have some detection in there. You'll even not only see the tab if the HTTP message is not serialized in that format that I'm looking for. Only the appropriate cells are editable, so you can pick down to the cell level which cell will be editable by someone who's using the extension. It's got some search functionality. It's got some custom right-click and shortcuts, like keyboard shortcuts for copying and pasting individual cell values. You can export the table data to a CSV file. You can mark items and send them to intruder. It automatically fixes serialization errors, all thanks to HTTP Listener. So take, for example, repeater. I have a message caught in repeater, and I go in there and I modify it. I will have broken serialization at that point because one of my parameters was longer, and I don't know how to edit the binary data of the message to account for the length increase in my serialization, specs or whatever. So I call an HTTP listener, because once I hit go on repeater, it'll then, again, the last thing that happens, it'll go through the listener. When it hits HTTP listener, I have custom methods in there to look over the whole thing and automatically fix any errors that I might have made in my manual editing. So it'll automatically fix them, send them off after the message is sent, it will also actually update. This is just BurpSuite's own way of working. It will also update the repeater pane to reflect what was sent, so that you know that it fixed itself. Another really cool thing, because I was using a custom serialization format, HTTP Listener enabled me to use scanner and intruder with my application. And this was huge. This is actually the main reason why I wanted to make this extension. Since it's a serialized message, and like I said, if you change the length of anything, you have to account for it in the bits and bytes, so that the serialization is correct. Whenever I would scan anything, obviously scanners trying all these different kinds of parameters, it would just give me tons of errors because the serialization was never correct. Same for intruder. If I have, unless by some miracle all the payloads were the exact same length, which was never going to be the case. So because scanner and intruder also go, I mean everything goes through the HTTP listener, scanner and intruder's own messages were getting automatically fixed on their way out. So that enabled me to use scanner and intruder in full with my custom serialization format. So huge win. Some tips for extension development and testing. By the way, we're on number 4. So number 3 was the actual code for this extension. You can, I cleaned it up, so feel free to download it, use it as your shell, see what you can do with the different interfaces. So number 4, set up BurpSuite to use Jython. There's a guide in my page there that shows you exactly where to go to download Jython, where to go to in BurpSuite to set it up in the interface. So you can use Jython to write your extensions. Consider using an IDE. I actually set up IntelliJ IDEA Community Edition, so it's free. And I made a quick guide for it on how to set it up with Jython to develop your Jython extensions. And so you can see, you can use that save interface files from the API tab and save the actual interface files in your extension directory. And the IDE will be able to tell you what methods you have and, IDE stuff. So super useful. Lots of, gives you all the shortcuts and things like that. Logging. Definitely account for logging from the very first time that you're going to sit down and start writing your extension. Because you will have to debug, and you will have to do all kinds of print statements or whatever to find out what's wrong, find out what you have to fix. BurpSuite itself can output anything from your extension to the UI right there, either also to the system console if you open BurpSuite from console, or you can save it to a file. Beyond that, you can do your logging programmatically. So you can use Python's logging module to output stuff. You can just do print statements, which was what I did because I didn't know any better. But Python's logging module for sure is the way to go. What else? You can do all kinds of things. So always, make sure to account for this. You will have to debug. You will have to find out what's happening. Sometimes down to a single byte in the message. So keep that in mind. And what you see here in the screenshot can be found in the Extender tab and this Extensions section. Any questions? All right, I guess they're smart as hell. Last tip, mind BurpSuite's memory, both for running and reloading your extensions. And for each of those, I have tips there on the web page. For running your extension, depending on how heavy it is, BurpSuite might start getting sluggish if it doesn't have all the memory that it needs. For reloading, because you will have to do a lot of reloading every time you change something about it, so you're debugging, you found a bug, you go and fix it, it's not going to be automatically fixed in BurpSuite because your extension was already loaded in there. It doesn't know you fixed it. It has to read it again. So you have to unload it, load it up again with the fix. And that, because BurpSuite never closes and reopens itself to reload your extension, that eventually takes up memory over time, especially the bigger your extension is. So there are ways around it. You can use the Java 64-bit version to get over 4 gigs of memory available to you. So go to those resources to find out how to do that. The BAP store, I'm sure you've all seen this. Not really a store because everything is free. And there's no cost, so there's no cost to download any of these. People put their stuff up there all the time. I couldn't put my own because it's internal only. And the shell doesn't really do anything. So, but go take a look. Download these all. See how people are doing things. I used a few of these to find out how they were doing stuff that I wanted to do. So go in. It's the code will be, it's all open source. It will be in your machine. You can see what they're doing. The custom logger I recommend as a first time kind of thing. So go take a look at what the custom logger does. It was developed by Portswigger themselves. So everything in there is 100% correct and following their best practices. Like I said, Extender is open to the free version. Some extensions will require pro features because they use pro interfaces, but definitely not all of them. So go download, go learn, see what's happening. Any questions about extensions at all? Because now we're done and going to automation. All right. BurpSuite's automation features. You don't need extensions or anything to use these. These are all built in. You can just dive right in and see what they do. Under proxy and then the options sub-tab, you'll see these two sections, response modification and match and replace. Response modification, just any of those checkboxes will do what it says for every response that comes by. So, convert your HTTPS to HTTP, remove secure flag from cookies, remove all JavaScript. Depending on your test, you might want to just do that for every single response that comes in. Of course, because we're all savvy BurpSuite users, remember scoping so that you're only applying this stuff to your defined scope. Match and replace. It's got a very granular set of rules for you to define. These can be applied either to requests or responses, and it will happen as long as they're enabled. Don't forget to enable them on the interface over there. These will be triggered every time. It doesn't matter if you're intercepting. As long as you're in scope, they'll be triggered as long as they're enabled. So you don't have to be intercepting for them to kick in. So things like changing false to true everywhere. Do I get extra permissions? Maybe. They all do use regular expression rules. You can use literal match and replace, so whatever you type will be exactly what it searches for. But you can also use regular expression for more granular control. And again, don't forget your scoping. Cookie handling. Under the Options main tab and Sessions sub-tab, you'll find the session handling rules. That will be the very first section. Once you click Edit on BurpSuite's default cookie handling rule, which is called Use Cookies from Burp's Cookie Jar, and then you go to the Scope tab on the window that's open, you can select all of the tools that will be able to retrieve cookies from the cookie jar and use them. Repeater, you'll see, is by default unchecked. This means that if you're testing a website with Repeater and all of a sudden you lose your session and you have to go to the browser and log in again, Repeater is going to continue using the old cookie unless you check this. If you check this, it's going to be able to retrieve cookies from the jar, update your session, and then you can continue that way. Make sense? Cool. For storing cookies in the cookie jar, just scroll down a bit in the same pane, so we're still under Options, Sessions. Scroll down a little bit and you'll see the actual cookie jar and all of the tools that are allowed to store cookies in the cookie jar. By default, only Proxy and Spider, but you can check any of the other ones and they'll be able to then as they acquire new cookies, access the cookie jar to update those cookies as well. Macros, excellent feature. Macros are used for a particular sequence of requests with a specific parameter settings that you need. So, for a complex web application, the login process is more than one request-response pair. It's actually like 5. And they pass around different parameters and different cookies. You can actually create a macro to record that login action from the browser and have Burp recreate it, so that whenever you lose your session, you could perhaps use a macro to automatically log in again with BurpSuite without having to go back to the browser and doing it manually. So they use macros can be triggered, I believe, directly from extensions as well, but also from session handling rules. But first, let's learn how to create a macro. So to create macros, back over here real quick, you'll see there's an add button. That's what you hit. Hit add. Macro recorder pops up. This will be the same interface as your proxy history. It'll show you all of the requests that you have, and you can select from any of these if they're already there, or if they're not still there. As you browse, they'll start trickling in here. So no matter what you have in there, you can go back to your browser, log in, all of the login requests will come up in here. Select all of them, hit OK. This will then pop up. It'll show you all of the requests that you selected with all of the hosts and methods and parameters and everything. For each of them, you can configure the request so that you can do things like this. Tell BurpSuite whether to use for this parameter a preset value that you just type in right there, or the value that was derived from the previous response. So if you get a value from the previous response that you want to use, just select it there. This is how you configure your parameters, exactly how you want them to be when executing these sequence of requests. So they're always the way that you set them up, always the way that you are required to use them. Always remember to test. There's a nifty button, test macro at the bottom. This will make BurpSuite actually fire off those requests one at a time. It will, of course, wait for the previous response to come back before it fires at the next one, because you might need those parameters. And then by the end, go to the last one, see the response from the last one, and see if it's indeed what you had in mind, what you needed to get. If not, just go back and reconfigure your stuff. Custom rules. So these are the rules that, among other things, can be used to call your macros. When you add a rule, so still options and sessions subtab, it's at the very top. Go and hit add. You can then use any of these actions. Use cookies from the session handling jar. Set a specific cookie or parameter value. Check whether the session is valid. Prompt for in-browser session recovery. Run a macro. Run a post-request macro, even. So, and also invoke a burp extension. So if at any specific point in time you want your extension to be invoked automatically, just set up a rule. Again, just like the automatic match and replace, these will be triggered, the rules will be triggered for every message, unless you specifically set in there when you're creating the rule how often it gets triggered. I like to say only trigger my rule, I have a automatic session check rule to make sure my session is still valid. When I'm running scanner, so that for whatever reason I lose my session, I want scanner to keep going because I'm not looking at it all day. And then I have the rule to check the session, but I don't want it to incur all of that overhead where every request will fire off the session check macro every time. So I just have it run every 5 or every 10 requests. You can configure all of that when creating a rule. So here's an example. I've got my first macro. It submits one request response pair. Submits one request and gets one response. And the response content, I know, because I know my application, indicates whether I have a valid session. And that's it. Macro 2 submits a series of requests with specified login credentials. You can enter those manually in your macro so that I can log back in. My rule is the check session is valid rule. And all that the rule does is run macro 1 so that I can check whether my session is valid. Match an invalid value in the response. And if the value is valid, I don't need to do anything else. Just I still have a valid session. Stop right there. If it's invalid, if I need to reacquire my session, run macro 2, which reacquires my session for me. And like I said, this is invoked every 5 requests. That number is arbitrary. You can put any number you want in there, any integer anyway, any positive integer. Every rule also has its own scoping as far as tools are concerned. So they use your BurpSuite scope. They also use a tools scope. So same as the cookie jar, same as the BurpSuite's default session handling rule. You can pick which tools are allowed to call upon this rule to invoke all of your macros and stuff. So if I'm using scanner, I want scanner to be able to use this rule, obviously. So I check scanner in there. Any questions? Okay. This, again, is the website you need. Go in there. All the slides are in there. All the resources are in there. The guide for setting up your IDE, how to set up Jython, all of the custom tab extensions that I had, the custom serialization extension I had. Go out there, learn, go out there and play. Thank you so much for listening.